What is up, everybody? Mr. Purtis here. Welcome to Unit 6 on the Modern World. This video is on the Mexican Revolution. Kind of gets combined for thematic sake with the Chinese and Russian revolutions, although its characteristics are a little bit different, although there are, of course, some similarities as well. So just to jump right into this here, last time we really talked about Latin America, besides a little bit connection with imperialism in the United States, is really the independence movements in Latin America. So if you recall back, the Latin American region, which goes from Mexico down to South America here, as well as the Caribbean, most of these areas got their independence during the Age of Revolutions in the early 1800s. There were a bunch of issues, including the social structure in Latin America, which was based on birth, which basically put the peninsulares in top. Even after they get independence in Latin America, many of these countries find a lot of issues. Number one is there really is like this strong man kind of sense in Latin America in which one person really becomes like a dictator in most of these countries, even after their independence. So that's issue number one. Also, we kind of get rid of this Peninsular group at the top, and this Creole group, which led the Latin American revolutions, just puts themselves on top, and they become in charge. So we really don't see much change in the social hierarchy, and the Creoles just take over the role that the Peninsulares had of running the government. And they still, for the most part, in most countries in Latin America, oppress the mestizo, mulatto, Native American, African descent population. So there's those two issues. Also, there's no industrialization here, so we don't have this railroad, good roads for transportation. And the result of this, of not having these railroads built, and just these roads to travel, is we really have a lot of regionalism, meaning that like people don't identify as a country. And we're at this time period in the mid 1800s and late 1800s where people are really identifying as a nation state, and many countries in Latin America don't, which puts them at a disadvantage if you're trying to raise an army or some kind of military. Also, there's still economic dependence. Many of these countries were run by Spain. Even after their independence, they are still primarily trading with Spain, and they really have a reliance on industrialized countries to trade. So I just want to show you this picture real quick. Coming back, so leading up to 1900, there is imperialism going on in the Caribbean, but it's not the same kind of imperialism as Africa, and we see in East Asia and Southeast Asia. The imperialism in Latin America really is economic imperialism. So essentially what happens is, I'll use Guatemala and Honduras here as an example. The United Fruit Company, which is an American-based international, transnational company, really grows their bananas for the most part in Guatemala and Honduras. And the United Fruit Company will go in and buy up most of the banana producing land in these countries, make a lot of money off the production of the bananas, but most of that money goes back to the United States and does not go into the hands of the pockets of the people in Guatemala and Honduras, because it's an American-based company. Many of these areas become known as a banana republic. That's a term, banana republic, not to be confused with the clothing company, but the banana republic refers to these governments are going to be bribed significantly by these foreign businesses that come in and make so much money off of it that the businesses then bribe or have these corrupt government officials locally that take money. Also, these countries rely on one crop, and it's never good to be a single crop economy. If the price of bananas worldwide goes down, you lose money as a country. So that's one issue, or a couple issues that we deal with there. In 1917, the Mexican Revolution takes place. It actually starts 10 years before that, but around 1900, we see this kind of revolt happen in Mexico. The second time we have a revolution in Mexico. The first one was to get rid of Spain. This is the second one. It's at the same time as the Russian Revolution, and if you remember back to World War I, this is the exact same time that Germany is sending the Zimmermann telegram to Mexico. So there's a whole bunch of problems going on in Mexico that were never solved from the Age of Enlightenment, Age of Revolutions period, that people are going to rise up and try and solve. The first one is there's poverty among peasants. The majority of people in Mexico are peasants. The majority of them are of native descent. They are not of Spanish ancestry. They are living in a high poverty. And what you have is the concentration of wealth of people in Mexico in the hands of a small group of people, and then you kind of have everyone else. They tried to industrialize like most countries around the world, but like a lot of countries outside of Western Europe, Japan, and the United States / Canada, their struggle with it. They do have some factory workers. They do have people who are mining gold, mining coal, mining copper, and those individuals who are coal miners as well as factory workers have poor wages. Also, we have a president named whose last name is Diaz, who's been in power for over 30 years. He won 9 presidential elections, and he's still in power, and he's corrupt. He's getting money from outside forces. He's concentrating the power of his wealth and his power in the hands of himself instead of a true democracy where it's supposed to be spread out in an ideal form. And people are upset. Also, there's a middle class of people who are not just coming back here for a second. We're talking about not just this group of people here, but this group in the middle here who really are pushing for equal rights, who are pushing for these Enlightenment promises from 100 years ago when the revolution happened, who still don't feel like they have a political say. And these are just 2 leaders, great mustaches for these 2 guys. Pardon my Espanol pronunciation, but we have Zapata here and Pancho Villa, who are 2 of the leaders. Zapata was in the north, which is probably more detailed than we need to know here. Villa was in the south. Villa kind of organized farmer peasants. He was more kind of the industrialized north. The 2 kind of joined forces, and they toppled Diaz. This story is much more complex than I'm making it here. I'm just simplifying it for what you need to know for AP World. So this new government takes over. They topple the corrupt Diaz administration, this kind of singular dictatorship, and they have a whole bunch of reforms in Mexico. The first one is they nationalize some of the natural resource industries, the oil industry, coal industry, minerals, the natural minerals. They're going to nationalize it. That term nationalization right here is a great term to know because we're going to see it a lot in the 20th century. It generally refers to governments taking over these industries. So instead of having a private businesses like we have in the United States for the oil industry, Exxon Mobil, I'm drawing a blank of other gas stations, but those gases, they're private companies, and then they buy up land and they drill for oil. This means that the government will run the oil industry. This is this is socialism / the roots of communism. So we see a little bit of socialism here. Also, we see is the redistribution of land. The government is going to take land away from large landowners, and they're going to give that, and foreign governments. So if you are a U.S. company and you're in oil industry and you own land in Mexico, the government of Mexico is going to seize that land from you and then redistribute this land, the large landowning farms and the resources, and they're going to redistribute that land for farming out to poor peasants who are pushing for this revolution from the start. Also, we have workers' rights. They're going to increase minimum wage, right to strike. A lot of these things that we saw maybe like 40 years before in Western European countries, Mexico is going to put in place as well. So on the front, a lot of these seem very socialist, very communist in a similar way to China and Russia. What the difference is that Mexico continues to have a democracy. They have an elected government where they have a constitution, and that constitution is followed for the most part. There is still some corruption that goes on, but we see that in many democracies around the world. So we have some ideas of this communism and socialism, but for the most part, politically, we remain a democracy. Equality, we don't see the totalitarianism that we see in China and Russia. And Mexico, I want to say this again, is not on its, and politically, it's a democracy. We're not looking at a communist country here, so that's the difference. One last thing, we have a huge increase in nationalism in Latin America in the 20th century. Cultural, really focusing on Native American culture, Aztec, Inca, Mexican culture as well. And we see, this is Diego Rivera, one of the very famous artists of Mexico, who is going to paint images of that Aztec Mexican heritage, kind of taking pride and bringing back nationalism or starting nationalism in Latin America. So this is kind of where we're going to leave off. We'll come back to Latin America a little bit in a couple weeks, but that's what I got. Any questions, as always, write them down. Let me know. Thanks for watching.